Yes.
On behalf of Art Matters and Teamwork Arts and Ojas Art, we welcome you to this new series, Articulate. As we
Thank
continue
you.
to tackle the ongoing pandemic and the devastating impact it's had on artists and artisans across the world and in India, we've initiated an advocacy and fundraising program to support them called Art Matters. Through Articulate Art Matters, we hope to create conversations around inspirational stories that shine a spotlight on the rich diversity of art forms. Articulate Art Matters draws inspiration from our current collaboration with Ojas Art called Fables of the Earth. The online exhibition is a showcase of 100 indigenous artworks from Bhil, Gond, Madhubani, and Worli that have been specially commissioned and curated in a one-of-its-kind virtual gallery with the aim to raise resources for our traditional and folk artists. If you haven't visited the virtual gallery already, please do so at ojasart.com and buy these carefully selected pieces of work and support these artisans. As you know, if artists and artisans don't create work and don't sell them at the end of the day, they don't eat. And that's the reality in our very insecure world of the arts. Our first session of the Articulate Art Matters series is Madhubani art, reflecting conflicts within society. Our panelists today, Santosh Kumar Das, Madhubani artist, Susan S. Wadley, Professor of Anthropology, Emerita Syracuse University, Peter Zernis, Curator, Ethnic Arts Foundation, and it's been moderated by Kathryn Myres, Professor of Painting, University of Connecticut, and curated by Anubhav Nath from Ojas Art. Kathryn Myres is an artist and professor of art at the University of Connecticut, where she has taught painting and drawing since 1984. She is the recipient of 3 Fulbright Fellowships to India in 2002, 2011, and 2020, and individual artist fellowship awards from the Connecticut Office of the Arts in 1991, 2012, and 2019. She has exhibited her paintings widely in the United States and in India, including at Gallery Art and Aesthetic and Ojas Art in New Delhi. Her video series regarding India features video interviews with over 20 artists in India and has been screened in many locations, including the National Gallery of Modern Art in Bangalore. Susan S. Wadley is a professor emerita at Syracuse University. Since the early 2000s, she has curated several exhibitions featuring Mithila art at Syracuse University, as well as in Iceland. Santosh Kumar Das is a Mithila artist from Madhubani in Bihar. Das learned his art from the women in his household, beginning with his mother and later on his aunts, the great artists Mahasundari Devi and Karpuri Devi. The inspiration for his art has been diverse, from politics, natural disasters, and cinema to music and religion. A fine arts graduate, he also ran an art school in his hometown. Das has traveled to the United States with his art and is the recipient of the Ojas Art Award presented to him at the Jaipur Literature Festival. To create art that celebrates the color black has been a long-term project with him. This project has taken him 7 years to complete, and the result is a fabulous, intricate visual and narrative tribute to the many muses that have shaped his artistic vision. Peter Zernis, Latvia-born, Brooklyn-bred, is a dedicated researcher and supporter of India's Mithila Madhubani School of Painting. He's also associated with the Ethnic Arts Foundation, one of the biggest promoters of Mithila art, which is practiced in the Mithila region that is spread across Nepal. In the world, he spoke to Giran about why he's expected his life entranced by this art form. Once again, I'd like to thank our partner, Anubhav Nath, Ojas Art, for presenting the first ever session of Articulate. Remember to follow our social media handles, Teamwork Arts, on Facebook and Instagram to get notified on our upcoming sessions. And in case any of you drop off due to bandwidth issues, You can find us on our YouTube channel, Art Matters. Ladies and gentlemen, Madhubani Art, reflecting on conflicts within society, moderated by Kathryn Myres. Kathryn, over to you.
Thank you for the introduction, Sanjoy, and welcome to all of you for what I hope will be a really interesting conversation with many different opinions. I've come up with a series of questions, and I know what happens in many discussions that we don't need more than one question, because one question can create dialogue in many different areas. But as moderator, I'll try to make sure that everybody has an equal amount of time to speak, and that we try to stay on subject as much as possible. So my first question is for anyone who wishes to respond. Can you highlight any Mythala artists who you feel have responded to societal issues or conflicts in a particularly insightful and skillful way that has helped to inform and educate the public? And I ask, as part of that question, was this part of a larger body of work that demonstrated an overall sense of social consciousness or conscientiousness, or was it responding more to well-known global, national, or local events as they have happened? And Susan, maybe I'll ask you to respond first, and we can also use a hand raise if people want to kind of interject different ideas as we're talking.
Thank you. I actually had thoughts about two particular female artists, both relatively young, one in her late 20s and the other in her early 30s, and possibly a third who is now in her 50s. The one who is probably most provocative is a young woman named Shaolin Kumari. She was trained at the Mythala Art Institute. She comes from a family in Madhubani district, or Muzaffarnagar, and she has painted most articulately about women's issues, and particularly about the issues that women face in marriage. And one of her pieces, the first one I ever really saw, was called Shakti. She here was driven by the death of a cousin who was married and had almost died when she had her first child, and was made by her family to get pregnant again, and died when she had her second child. This was a woman who was working towards her PhD. She was bright, she was articulate, and Shalini was completely devastated by her death, and wrote and painted Shakti as a painting about the power of women and the power that they have inside of them, and the power that this woman was never able to bring to the world, because her marriage and the demands of her community of Brahmin rural India insisted that she have a second child that she couldn't have. A second painter who I think is particularly articulate is Ronnie Ja. Ronnie was married in her after 10th class, and about 5 years ago finished her PhD in her mid-50s. So she was married at about 15 or 18 and had 3 children, and in between each degree managed to go back to school and finished her PhD at Darbhanga University, I believe in 2015, maybe 2014. But starting in the early 2000s, she began to paint about what was happening in her community. And one of her best known paintings is about the abortion clinic and the abortion of female fetuses. It's a potent painting showing the doctor, the female doctor, as a cobra who takes female fetuses away and from the women whose in-laws have forced them to come to the clinic. The painting has at the very front of it a young girl who's the daughter, already daughter of this woman, who's saying, "Don't take my sister away." And the mother-in-law, crouched as one is likely to do in rural India, by the table where the wife is lying, saying, take the fetus, take the fetus. And Ronnie at one point said that her painting was talked about on the local news, and one of the female gynecologists in town called her and said, "Why are you talking about me as a cobra?" And she said, "Well, you're not a cobra if you don't take female fetuses. You're only cobra as a female gynecologist if you take female fetuses." And she said that the cobra is actually less dangerous than the female gynecologist, because if the female gynecologist goes after you, she'll get you, whereas the cobra sometimes lets people live. Mm-hmm. I think maybe I should stop there and let someone else react to this.
Peter, maybe we'll go to another curator, and then.
Well, on the Ronnie, I was going to say Ronnie Ja also, but the second half of your question, particularly insightful, skillful way, and help even inform and educate the public. The Amir Khan Productions got in touch with us because of her paintings. And that was back in 2013. There was a show, I guess the show is still on, is it? He had a show on that discussed in Delhi contemporary issues of child abortions and so on. And they got in touch with us. And Susan, you were part of that. You were copied on those emails. Do you remember that? And they even came and they did an interview with Ronnie Ja. That is now, it's still out on YouTube, and it's also out on Amir Khan's production. And they said that she, meaning Ronnie Ja, just spoke very, very forcefully. And it was, it came, I just received an email, not just then in 2013, that came from Libby, Amir Khan Productions, and said, we've seen these paintings. And then they did a 3.5 minute piece on her, and using the various, in fact, they began with the painting that Susan mentioned, the abortion painting, and then went on.
Susan?
Yeah. I just wanted to add that after the Delhi rape in 2011, 2012, Ronnie painted another painting that relates to the female abortion issue, but it's sort of cartoon style. There's, I think, 6 frames within it. It starts with female fetuses being taken by a gynecologist, and the patting of young boys on their heads as they're allowed to grow. And it shows a group of young men and young women. The young women are outnumbered by about 2 to 1 by the young men in the picture. And the boys in the lower half of the painting begin to attack the women, or one of them to chase her. And in the final picture, she has portrayed a woman having her clothes ripped off of her. And very, very poignantly, there is a bird in the bush next to where the girl is standing as the boys attack her that has a bird with its feathers stripped off of her. And it's just an amazing piece of thoughtfulness about the attacks that happen to women across India. And she attributes it in this painting to the unequal sex ratio, but I think it's much, much greater than that. I've been going to Delhi since I was 18, and it's always present.
Thank you, Susan. Any other insights or commentary on that particular question? And I think just to add to that, I think what you're both saying, Susan and Peter, is that we always say because I've been teaching painting for so long, there oftentimes can be good politics that makes for bad art, and great art that makes for bad or uninformed politics. But it sounds like with the work of both of these artists that I've seen, that that's not the part of the reason that these powerful subjects have reached an audience, and again, not pushed audiences away, is the uncanny beauty at which these horrific events are portrayed. And I think just in terms of what's permissible to be pictured in India, which might be different than in the West, the artist seems to know exactly where to stop, how much to suggest, and how much that the viewer can read themselves, which is quite important, because these are also works of art and they're handled. And I might compare that to Santosh, his work that I first saw at the Asian Society about the Gujarat riots after having returned from India and having been in Ahmedabad when they started. I was gripped by the work because I recognized it, but also gripped by how extraordinarily skillful and lavishly beautiful in terms of the dexterous design qualities, the use of figure ground, which always amazes me in Madhubani art, the use of white space, the line. And again, there's this idea that something that's depicted that's really awful is depicted in such a beautiful way, but that also helps to bring, not that they're not very edgy in terms of the way that line is, but also the way they're able to bring the viewer in a way that says, don't hide, don't turn your face away, come closer and see what's happening, and open up your minds and open up your hearts. And so, again, the role of a work of art is not, the burden on the artist is not to have to educate people. But I think with works like these, if the artist is brave enough to take it on, because there is a certain courage to taking on, which leads to one of the other questions, that sometimes artists might want to take on certain issues, but they need to make a living and they don't want to turn away viewers. So sometimes it depends on if they're, let's say, making work that might be in an international exhibit like the Asia Society. There might be certain themes that might be more appropriate than someone who wants a very beautiful piece of traditional art for their home. Santosh, I was curious if you have any things that you want to say, because you certainly have made work about, certainly the Gujarat series was something that was incredibly compelling. But in terms of just your community and the artists you're around, can you think of any artists that you know of that whose work on various social themes, male or female, really impresses and moves you?
Yes, there are artists who are dealing with these issues of women very recently, but there are very few. And there is one artist whose name is Mahalakshmi, who has just done a painting regarding how a woman is abandoned by her own husband immediately after her marriage, because he leaves for the city for job, and then she stands before the nuptial, before the drawing of cover in the nuptial chamber, weeping and mourning and dismaying over her life, because what she thought of a good, happy conjugal life didn't materialize. So the very symbols, which are symbols of protection, prosperity, and I can say conjugal happiness, turned out to be symbols of distress and dismay and desperation. So this one painting done by her, which is in David's collection, is very interesting. And she has done a lot of series of, I can say, drawings regarding her motherhood, because she has just become mother very recently. So she is also very much concerned with the women issues. And she has done a lot of paintings, I think, which I cannot remember right away, but she is very much interested to present these issues in her art, to reflect these issues in her art. And maybe there are other girls also who too seem to take interest in these issues as their subjects for their painting. So things are changing a lot nowadays. Things have become very things which have never, I can say, drawn attention, received attention from the society or from people in general, have become very, I can say, compelling issues for, especially for the women artists and men artists as well, to focus on them within a social, I can say, framework. Like I myself have done a beautiful, a very, I can say, interesting sketch of the Nirvaya incident, and it's a very powerful sketch which I have not yet, I can say, translated into a work of art. But it's about how how the Constitution came in question. So I'm showing the Constitution is on the bus in which all those, I can say, culprits are sitting, and on top of the Constitution, the victim is just crying, weeping madly about what is happening to the woman, how women are safe in a city like Delhi. And then the question is that it is not just a social question. It is a kind of question which directly concerns the role of the Constitution, the role of the law. Is the law responsible for giving women, ensuring women's safety? So it is still a big subject for me, and I have done lots of homework as well, because I have read all the magazines, all the articles in all the leading magazines of India after the incident occurred, and I was really moved by what her parents had gone through, and how the dream of a parent was shattered after this incident. So it's really very sad how a woman is looked, by men in our society. So this could be a very, I can say, powerful subject for me for my next project. So this is all I can say about myself. But there are a lot of other things which I think I can do later. Yes, Susan.
Thank you, Santosh.
Yes.
Is there anything? Yes.
Yeah, I think we should just add, because recently, because Syracuse has one of the largest Mitula collections in the country, we decided about a month ago to do an online exhibition on art on COVID, which will be coming out in November. And I've been in contact with numerous artists in Madhubani, and there are some amazing understandings of issues around what has happened in India itself for the last 6 months, including one incredible piece by a young, different artist named Shaolin Kumari, of Shakuntala, who was a woman who was forced, as many migrants were, out of Delhi or some big city and had to go home. She was pregnant, and the painting shows her giving birth on the road, nursing her child, and then continuing to walk with masses of people down the road till she reached home with her newborn daughter. This is just one of many. There are many of the 30 or so paintings I've seen that have captured instances of what's really, really happening in India today. And I think we need to take recognition of the fact that the artists have a real message to give to everyone about that.
And I think it's also important that you're talking about, again, very kind of local issues, because there's the difference between, let's say, the enormous output of artists after 9/11, and then almost like the kind of desperateness of collectors to find these images. And I think then there was a certain appreciation, but also kind of an amusement about some of the naivete, let's say, of artists who are not in the place where the event happened, who portray it in particularly different ways. And I remember, Susan, that was the case when I was at that wonderful seminar in Syracuse, where I first met you and saw that exhibition of the artist Arthur Flowers, who worked with a Pachua painter about African-American lives and his depictions of the Ku Klux Klan, because he didn't know what that was. And so it was this incredibly imaginative depiction of something, because he didn't know the history of what that was. And sometimes I feel like some of those things in a way that are amusing, because we call it naive, because they don't really know the issues of which they're portraying, but everybody sort of sometimes wants to do a certain painting about a certain issue, because, and artists and the art world are accused all the time of jumping on the bandwagon of something, where other artists maybe wait and let it gestate for a while and do a lot of, as Santosh was saying, do a lot of research around it. So it's an extended series and not kind of a one-off. But it's also quite tempting when something's happening and you have patrons, again, this sort of desperation of when I was in India, people to get images of artists from 9/11 and probably also commissioning them. And then the artists themselves wouldn't have maybe had the research ability to find out all the details of it. But what you're discussing is something that's so extremely and wonderfully local that it may appeal again to a smaller audience of people that sort of know, as opposed to a larger audience who might want the kind of more sensational depictions to happen. And I think that's sort of a difference I see. And it sort of leads to some of my questions too about the differences between artists that maybe work for foreign patrons or Indian patrons in terms of what those patrons want and what the artist's knowledge is of those issues. And again, the kind of almost sometimes avalanche of artwork that comes from a particular issue. And again, before we get too far off the subject, I wanted to move to a question that was related to what I just asked. And I think Santosh sort of covered it, we covered it a little bit, but you know, it's obviously been for quite a long time permissible for male artists to practice Mithila art. But outside of traditional motifs, or even within and outside of traditional motifs, is there a taboo? Are there certain subjects that men, even if they feel compassionate about a subject, are there certain subjects in which men can't depict, would be not permissible for them to depict, or women would not be able to depict, even if they might be moved by issues because it wouldn't be perhaps proper? Is there cases where artists cross the line in which it's not proper for them to be working on particular subjects? And I guess I'll just say a quick parallel to that might be in the US, where if you're not of a particular race or ethnic group, it's oftentimes thought that you're not capable of understanding these situations enough to make compelling art. But then, you know, authors who oftentimes imagine whole worlds and characters disagree, that they feel like they can kind of inhabit the worlds and bodies of other people. So Susan or Peter or Santosh,
at least I haven't come across that. But I can, just as a number of years ago, I was talking to Ronnie Ja, and when I was looking at her work, that was one of my first trips to India. I was amazed suddenly to come across a panel on the wife burning, and then she showed me a number of other paintings like that. And I said to her, I said, who buys these paintings? I said, you know, you want to make a living off your art. Who's going to hang this on their wall? And she said to me, she said, when the people come to my house to buy my art, the husbands always buy the Radhas and the Krishnas, and the wives buy these other pieces. Mm-hmm. So what at first would seem that there would be no public, no clientele for that kind of art, it turns out there's a subterranean, if you will, flow for it.
Mm-hmm.
If I can add, I actually haven't seen a whole lot of that between men and women. I mean, I don't see the men painting the female issues. They're not painting about the powers of women. They're not painting about abortion that I've seen. There may be some, but I'm just saying what I've seen. What the difference I do see is whether you paint about poverty or not. And I really don't see things like the high caste community painting, the men or women painting about issues of alcoholism, which Dulari Devi has, who is a low caste painter of some renown. She's painted an incredible piece about what happens in floods and the fact that the rich lock up their houses and get on a boat and go away, and and the poor are left to deal with the carcasses in the rivers. There's a real disconnect between classes in terms of the way some of the art shows up, and so I think that's an interesting difference. I think there's a big disparity between what male and female paint, but I don't think it's particularly intentional.
Thank you, Susan. That's a really important distinction that I hadn't thought of.
Well,
Santosh, are there any subjects that you think I would love to paint about this, but I can't? I know that this is something that would be sort of looked down on, or maybe even that an artist of a different economic standard or gender might say, no, you can't. This is my territory. Even if you're very sympathetic about this, this isn't something that you can possibly know because you're not female, or because you're not lower caste, or you're not living in poverty. Has that ever occurred to you, or you've thought about something and then have just thought, no, I don't think that this is a subject that I should tackle or will be looked upon favorably?
Yes, I can tell you that what you people were discussing a minute ago about the gender disparity, or about a particular issue the women painters wants to paint, or the man artist doesn't want to paint. No, there is nothing as such. I don't think these barriers exist that much. I don't think so. It doesn't exist that much. I can say strongly. But the only, I think the point of interest is that what kind of practitioner you are, what kind of artist you are, because it all, boils down to the point of being an artist. So if you are an artist and you choose a particular subject which is close to you, and which may not be issue based, or which may not be a particular, which may not be seen from a particular angle, or maybe a political angle or a gender angle. It could not be like that. The thing is that what touches you, what inspires you, what strikes you as a subject. So I always think I can handle all kinds of subjects. To me, it's not that I cannot paint a woman-related issue, or a gender disparity, or the gap between the, the discrimination between the gender in society, nothing as such. Because I think I know the language deeply, fully, perfectly, so I can choose anything as my subject. But so far as women painters choose a particular subject, I think the role of the patron is very important, because the patron gives a push. The patron motivates them to choose a particular subject, to depict a particular subject, which actually is not their concern that directly or that intentionally. But if they receive that much, I can say, support, or especially a push from a scholar, from a friend, or maybe anybody, then they choose to paint it as a subject. So in my case, it has nothing to do, it has nothing to do with a push from a friend, or from a scholar or an academician, nothing like that. It depends upon how I feel about it. Because as an artist, you just have to feel very sensitively about a topic, very deeply about a topic, and it should be very, it should be research based. If, like I did a Gujarat series, I did, a very serious research. I studied it, the whole riot, thing, for 4 months. So I learned a lot about, about the riot. The riots just does not happen. It is very much, premeditated. I mean, pre-planned. It is very much thought of in advance. It is very much the handiwork of a politician. So they just do it for, for a particular political goal. So that's the thing I have learned from the Gujarat series. So I can say, if you take a subject like a riot, or Nirvaya rape case or any other such, complex issues, you have to be completely serious and dedicated to it. Only then I think I can do justice to my, to my art or to my project. So I never see it as a, as a difficult subject or as a barrier, or I need a certain kind of, impetus or push from someone else. No, in my case, it's not that. But my society as a whole, the women painters simply portray things which they are directly which they are directly related to, like they reflect on things which they face or encounter in everyday life. So if they choose a dowry death which they face in society, if they choose fetus infanticide, which definitely they notice in their society, so even for that they need someone else, to suggest her to choose it as a subject.
I think also an important point too that you've made by talking about your paintings of the Delhi rape, and then Susan mentioning Ronnie Ja's, is that there are certain subjects that benefit from being portrayed by men and women, and there might be certain subjects that would be difficult for a male to portray because they can't really understand that in a deep way, and the piece might end up being seen as superficial or opportunistic, jumping on the bandwagon. But in this case too, there's certain subjects that are a national problem. It's not a woman's problem or a man's problem. And I would really enjoy, again, seeing the different points of view that a male and female artist might take on a one particular subject. And I think one thing that you've touched on in the answer to that question that we have already covered, that since patronage is so important to artists, again, aside from Anubhav, I don't know of any other, commercial galleries in urban areas that regularly exhibit the work of indigenous, tribal, or folk artists, vernacular artists, alongside work of what we might call the mainstream art world. And so that we're not always pigeonholing and having separate categories for this work. But a lot of Mithila artists do work due to patronage, because there's only so many people that can come to Madhubani to look at work. Do artists fear that sometimes making work for clients will interfere with maybe the sense of identity they're creating by work they really want to create? Because it's a huge labor intensive process, getting up and going into the studio, and the worth of that based on how other ways someone might make a living. And there's certain work that an artist must want to do, that you just want to make that, you're compelled to make that, but then you need to make a living. So you might have to stop and spend a lot of time working for a client. And then the work you're doing for the client might interfere with your desire to create a sense of identity of the artist who makes a certain kind of work. What kind of conflicts, again, maybe we can go back to you, Susan, can you, or Peter, think of any kind of conflicts you witnessed or heard about from artists with these two realms of their ongoing sense of identity by bodies of work that they create and come up with the topics for, and the need to work for clients?
Well, I know that, for example, 2 years ago when Mahalakshmi was invited to the Santa Fe exhibition, and she needed to create a lot of work for that exhibition. And so I was working with her. And she was frustrated and sometimes working 20 hours a day because they also had commissions that they had to fulfill in order to pay the rent and get the food. So that was she was always trying to do her own work for the Santa Fe exhibition, because they wanted, of course, she wanted a body of work to represent what she was doing. And here was an opportunity also to make a lot of money. But at the same time, there were these other commissions that, and sometimes repeat commissions from people that they had gotten that they had to finish. And so I know it was a very, very stressful time for her and for Shantanu.
Yeah, in the end, they didn't get the visa to be able to go, did they?
No, she went, but Shaolin Kumari
Oh, okay.
who had also been invited.
Yeah.
She did not get the visa.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the reason was because she happened to, interestingly enough, get married just a few months before she was, it came out of the blue, frankly. She was also working, both Shalini Khan and Mahalakshmi had gotten invitations, as you know, fully paid, airfare paid, hotel paid, everything, to go to Santa Fe. And they were both working away. Shalini Khan suddenly said, I'm getting married a month before she was supposed to leave. And she got married, but then when she went to the American embassy to get the visa, they simply said no. Right off the bat, they said, come back next year, because they were afraid that having just gotten married, with the whole point of her going to the States was to try to have the child in the States.
Oh.
So that kind of,
interesting. Yeah.
yeah.
Susan?
I can think of two kind of contradictory examples of this. Shalini Kumari, the other Shalini in this crew. I've asked her, and I checked again yesterday actually, and said, do you paint because you want to paint that topic or because you have patrons? She said, I only paint what I want to paint. And she's been painting about personal and public issues since about 2007. And when she first had an exhibition in San Francisco. And I think she's really right. I think she really only paints what she's committed to personally. But it could be a world issue. It's not that it's not a world issue. There's a stunning, stunning painting that she did about 2 years ago of Mother Earth giving Shiva, it's in black and white, black and red, basically, with a little white, giving Shiva a pot of the toxins that had covered the earth and were destroying the earth. And Shiva is supposed to drink it down the same way he drank the poisons of the oceans in Hindu mythology, and which is why he's called the blue throat, because the toxins stopped. And she's asking Shiva again to save the world from the toxins. This is pre-COVID, but it's so appropriate to COVID time, right? Yeah. So she paints about marriage. That's one of her primary things, and and her paintings have changed over her lifetime because her ideas of marriage have changed. But she also paints about public issues that really compel her. A woman who I think is much more dependent on income is Ronnie Ja, who is probably close to 60 now, who is a painter that lives in a small house in Madhubani with her children and, I believe, unemployed husband. And she tells me that I think she's an absolutely stunning traditionalist painter. She tells me that every once in a while she has to stop doing the work she really loves and paint stuff for tourists, people who come to Madhubani and want to be able to buy things really cheaply. And she showed me the last time I was there some really awful paintings, and I said, I don't want to see those. And she said, no, this is what everybody wants to buy, and you can have it for 500 or 1,000 rupees. And I was like, no. It was really, really horrible. So she's really driven by a market because she doesn't have any other source of income, basically, and some of the artists do have other incomes.
And Peter, as you were mentioning too, repeat requests too, that that even if some of these subjects that clients want are beloved, the idea of having to, I can't imagine having to do the same thing 2, 3, and 4 times because a client wants that, and they probably want, again, they say that artists become famous for one painting and then everybody wants that one painting, right. But artists naturally want to grow and expand into different subjects, but then there's the realities of the marketplace, and which is why so many people in the West, actually painters, opt for teaching jobs. So you have a certain amount of freedom that you're not sort of totally dependent on the market.
No, that's true. But Shalini Kumari is really an unusual painter in that Susan is right, that she only paints basically what's troubling her most of the time in her head. And but lately she has calmed down, and her art, there are 2 or 3 or 4 pieces now that I've seen that are unbelievable. I don't know whether you, Susan, bought them, or I think the San Francisco Museum, the one where I forget what's where the bride is being carried to the husband's house, but you see on one side of the painting there's nothing but a circle and footsteps going in one direction. You know, that one going in the other direction, and on the, let's say the other side is much smaller, the palanquin being taken with the bride. But what's really fascinating about it is that then in the center there is a blank circle, totally blank. She just drew the one, then the blank circle, and then the much larger circle with a goddess in the center and these feet going in 2 directions. And the idea of the feet going in 2 directions, and what is now troubling her for the last couple of years, is that, and even, and I think Susan, you probably saw this too, even in the beginning, right after she got married, that she said, I'm responsible both for my new family and for my old family. And yet I don't have personally any money. I'm nowhere now. Okay, in one way I've lost my old family. I'm supposed to go to the new family, but even in the new family, I don't have anything. So the footsteps that are going around in both circles means, where do I go? And she said the reason for the blank circle is that because that question has not yet been answered. But this is done in a modern style. I mean modern, not sort of contemporary, but what we would call, you know, modernism, with that blank circle and the way she draws.
Right.
And,
Yes.
And that piece is actually really more compelling because then she tells stories. I mean, one of her sisters is not allowed to call her parents without basically her in-laws' permission. Once you become a bride in rural North India, and I've lived in rural North India for a lot. I did research in a village for 5 years. She, you know, she's right. You know, you're cut off from your family and you're only responsible for your husband's family. And yet Shalini's parents are not well off. They never have been actually, or not in a generation anyway. And so she feels responsible for them and her younger sisters. And at the moment she's looking for a groom for her youngest sister because that's the latest crisis of the family.
Well, now that the COVID has really, for this particular family, as opposed to obviously for many, but for her, that the younger sister stays in the village to take care of the parents. And the younger sister actually had a quite good business going in painting saris and painting tablecloths and this kind of thing. And she was doing very, very well. And now nothing.
Right.
And now absolutely nothing. So Shalini was sort of indirectly complained. She was very happy she sold 3 paintings to a collector in California, but at a cut rate price because she just needed the money badly. But her work is incredible now. I mean, it's gotten into this, I don't know if you've seen the other, she did a series of paintings that are almost mystical. And very, very, very modern, very almost, and also minimalist. And those were sold to somebody, again, in one of her collectors in California. Her stuff, when she does it like that, then it looks like that, the one you were talking about.
I think also, Santosh, because you're an esteemed artist with a major reputation, and so I think at a certain point, an artist gains the freedom to paint whatever they want to paint, because at a certain point, when artists sort of maybe my projection is that they are no longer dependent on the client, because their work might be well known enough that there's sometimes, many artists we know, there's a waiting list for their work. And so that kind of success brings a lot of freedom with it. But there's still artists are sort of interested and charged, like, artists enter juried shows all the time because they get to make work about a certain theme that might be outside of their normal body of work. And that's interesting as well. Santosh, how about you, especially when you were a younger artist? Now, again, your career is so established that you, I know, can paint whatever you wish. And if a client has a piece that you would find interesting, then you could also do that as well. But when you were kind of just getting started, do you remember that sense of conflict, or other artists that you know, between what you want to paint and what the client might want to paint that you need to sell? And again, as Susan was saying, very interesting too, that some of the artists who need to kind of churn out work for clients maybe assume that the client won't really know the difference between the really, really refined art and the lesser refined art, as we see in the back of the Crafts Museum in Delhi, where there's a lot of craftspeople, and some of the work looks churned out with the fake antique paper, and other work looks really refined, and you have to be involved in the field certainly for a while to understand the difference. And but it's a hugely labor-intensive style of work, and so anything, even the smallest piece, requires a huge time commitment. And there's nothing, again, worse as for an artist, as I know, making a piece that you're not interested in when it's that labor-intensive. But how has that played out for you, Santosh Ji, about the client and your own desire to create work that is about your identity as an artist?
Yes, Susan. I can tell you about it from a very personal angle, that the word conflict has a different meaning, a very different meaning for me, because when I was trying all the new things in a very experimental manner, or trying to deal with new ideas, new subjects as a young artist, I was simply, I simply never received an encouragement by society or by my immediate neighborhood. So I think I realized that I had to walk on this path alone, on my own, with my mind, with my personal intelligence, with my pursuit as an artist, with my search for knowing myself. So to me, it's an entirely different engagement. To me, it's a different entirely, different practice. And to me, it's very much, very much a study of yourself, very much a study of things around you, very much a way of, knowing your mind and exploring your mind and exploring your life, or how art really, relates to you, what it means to you, or what you are trying to bring to it. If you bring, what it is that you want to bring to art. If you are trying to bring something really significant, something very profound, something very, I can say, timeless, then you are really, doing something very incredible for art. And that's what, because I listen to classical music very seriously, and very recently a very eminent classical musician, Jasraj, who I'm very greatly fond of, died. So I used to ask this question, like, when a great artist dies, and what do you think of it? Why do you try to remember him? Or why becomes so important? Because what it is that he has brought to music makes us remember him, makes us know him as a very, I can say, distinguished practitioner. And that later gives you lots of freedom. And then you can, any classical music musician, experiments with, experiments very little, not much, but they just rehearse the skill all their life. And through this practice, they really become able to understand it as a language, and then they can take all kinds of liberties with it as a language, as an expression. And that's what this art means to me. This Madhubani art means to me. So to me, when I was young, I had a template, which was Ganga Devi. I saw her art as a very young boy when I was just 12 years old or 13 years old. And when Ray asked all my aunts who were much older than me to do a logo for a catalog for an organization he was about to found, all the women did. All the women from my family came up with their drawings for the logo, and I too did for the same purpose. But Ganga Devi did the same for Ray, and she stood as a distinguished, she came up with a real artwork even for a logo. So what I learned from her is that if you are really have a masterful command over a language, you can do anything within that language. You can do anything within that technique. You can do anything within that skill. So as an artist, what you learn from art, or how art, what art gives you is very, very personal and very important. So there are a lot of things we are discussing in this talk are important and have happened to this art in recent times. But my take on this Madhubani art is different, because I want to see it as a language. Even when I was young, I wanted to work hard to know it as a language. And then in 1988, I saw her life cycle, and I'm sure it was not her brain behind that. I'm sure someone else from Delhi, maybe, and I can say a collector, or I don't know exactly whosoever it was, but maybe a collector or maybe an art, I can say aficionado or whosoever it was, asked her to do a series, to choose such a topic, such a narrative, such a concept, which was not, which was not common in her time, which was not a general practice in her time. No, I mean in Ganga Devi's time. And then Hasegawa too asked her to do the same when the previous version was sold. So I saw the life cycle, which was not exactly representing a particular conflict of women or a particular conflict-oriented work, but it was definitely talking about or showcasing the various roles a woman plays in society, like social, I can say a social or familiar role, like from a daughter to wife to mother. So this is all about life. This is not just a commentary or on a particular conflict. So what I learned from that is that she was the first contemporary painter in my eyes, or I think everybody may agree with it. So look, I mean, if you take art as a language, then it begins to function completely differently for a person. Then you begin to choose anything as your subject. Like right now, since we are all in this middle of this pandemic, and it has bad influences on everyone, I think especially on me, because I could not paint at all. I came to Delhi just a few days before this crisis began, and I am stuck in Delhi since then. I think I'm locked up in a room all the time. Can you imagine? Which is such a loss, which is such a loss, and which I feel so sad, not just for me. I feel for all the humanity, for all of us. I mean, what the pandemic has taught us as an idea of us, not as an idea of I. That's all about being human, that you have to think of ourselves as a human being. So the role of humanism became more important as an element in our life, I think in everybody's life. So these things I'm going to paint in my next projects, because I'm really moved by this pandemic. So what I'm trying to focus on is that art is basically, basically the culmination of who you are, exactly who you are. I mean, it grows with you, it grows with time. It takes all your journey till you reach this level. So I always feel it's very important to be honest, committed to your language, and then paint whatever you want to paint. It's a beautiful.
Santosh, I hope when you're locked in the room in Delhi, you have your art supplies with you.
Yes, I have my art supplies with me, but I don't have, but but I don't have the atmosphere because for long I have been painting in isolation, and I myself is the I myself see I see myself as something solitude personified. Like I'm all the time calm, speaking very little, and then I paint and play around with an idea. So it's a different, practice after all. It's a different.
Santoshi, I have to interrupt. I think we're out of time, and thank you for that very moving closing talk, which is a wonderful way to finish our conversation here. And I'd like to thank everybody and Anubhav for sponsoring this and for allowing us to have this wonderful conversation.
A very big thank you to our speakers today for the inaugural session of Articulate. A very big thank you to the audience for tuning in today. And please do visit ojasart.com/artmatters to catch the exhibition, which is on till September 10th. And we have a lot more exciting sessions coming up, and we will keep you in the loop. Please follow us on our various social media links and websites at Teamwork Arts and ojasart.com. Thank you very much.